They thought she was just another broke woman crashing their billion-dollar yacht party, a broken bar laughing at her tote bag, mocking her silence, humiliating her in front of everyone. But 5 minutes later, the ocean went quiet, a broken bar, when a massive Navy destroyer appeared on the horizon and hundreds of soldiers stood at attention, a broken bar saluting her. The laughter sliced through the humid sea air like broken glass, sharp and merciless. Claire Monroe stepped onto the yacht with nothing more than a faded fabric tote slung over her shoulder, her beige dress soft against the ocean breeze, her sandals, worn from years of use, scuffed quietly against the polished deck. Around her, expensive perfumes drifted in the air, diamond bracelets glittered like shards of captured light, and every guest dripped in brands designed to scream power. She didn't belong. They made sure she knew it. The first whispers started before she even reached the railing. A woman in a sequin gown leaned toward her friend, her wine glass tilting dangerously close to spilling. "Who invited her?" she murmured, her voice dripping with contempt. The friend smirked, pretending not to look. "Someone must have lost the guest list." Claire didn't react. Her loose black hair shifted slightly in the breeze, but her face remained unreadable, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun bled into the waves. She had weathered storms fiercer than this. She'd faced eyes colder than these. But the crowd wasn't satisfied with silence. Vanessa, the kind of woman who lived for being seen, was the first to strike openly. Mid-30s, her platinum blonde hair sculpted into an intricate knot. She wore a white dress molded perfectly to her figure, diamonds flashing at her wrists like tiny mirrors. She leaned close to a tall man in a tailored navy suit, her voice slicing across the deck so everyone could hear. "She looks like she's heading to the farmer's market, not a yacht party." Her laugh was sharp, practiced, designed to sting. The man grinned, his gaze running up and down Claire's plain dress. "This party's for elites," he said loudly, his voice rising above the music, "not dock workers." A ripple of laughter broke out, fueled by cruelty disguised as sophistication. Someone nearby snapped a photo, the click of their phone loud in the hush that followed. For the group chat, a younger woman whispered, her manicured fingers flying across the screen. Seconds later, Claire's photo was posted online, captioned, "Found the charity case." Claire didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She could feel their stares slicing into her back like small, deliberate cuts. Her fingers brushed the polished wooden rail, steady, unshaken. The sound of the ocean below drowned out their cruelty. The waves never judged her. But Vanessa wasn't done. She glided closer, her perfume expensive and suffocating, and tilted her glass toward Claire. "Honey," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness, "did you get lost on your way to the thrift store?" The group around her erupted again, their laughter echoing off the steel and glass. "This yacht's for people who belong," Vanessa added, her smile sharp and poisonous, "not strays." Claire's hand paused on the railing. For the first time, she turned her head slightly, her dark eyes meeting Vanessa's. Her voice was quiet, soft even, but it cut through the noise like a knife through silk. "Belonging," Claire said, "isn't about your clothes." The words landed like a slap. The laughter faltered for a beat, just long enough for silence to stretch uncomfortably. Then, as if to mask their unease, they forced more chuckles, louder this time, emptier. Claire turned back to the ocean, her tote resting lightly against her hip. She didn't need their approval. She wasn't here for them. But the mocking didn't stop. A group of younger guests, sunglasses perched on their noses like props in a magazine shoot, sauntered over, the glint of mischief in their eyes. One of them, a guy with slicked back hair and a gold chain thick enough to anchor a dinghy, smirked at her. "Hey," he said, holding out a pair of binoculars like a toy. "Do you even know the bow from the stern? Go on, play Navy for us." His friends snickered, one of them pulling out a phone to record. Claire glanced at the binoculars, then at him. Her gaze was steady, unblinking, sharp enough to cut through arrogance. Without a word, she handed the binoculars back. That silence, that refusal to engage, unsettled him more than any insult could have. He frowned, muttered something under his breath, and walked off with his friends, their laughter hollow. From behind the helm, the captain, a wiry man in his 50s with a weathered face that had seen decades of ocean storms, paused, watching her. There was something in the way she stood, her weight balanced perfectly, her shoulders squared but relaxed, the kind of stance only someone who had spent years on decks like this could carry. His hands hesitated on the wheel. Then, almost imperceptibly, he gave her a small, deliberate nod, the kind of nod that meant respect. A few nearby guests caught it, their whispers quick and sharp. "Why is he nodding at her?" A woman in a red hat muttered to her husband, her voice low but urgent. "She's nobody." But even she didn't sound convinced. Claire nodded back once. No smile, no flourish, just acknowledgement. A man swaggered toward her then, shirt unbuttoned, tan skin gleaming under the late afternoon sun. He was the type who thought charm was currency and arrogance was power. "You know," he said loudly, swirling his whiskey glass, "you could have at least tried to dress up. This isn't a soup kitchen cruise." His friends roared with laughter, one of them snapping a photo of her tote. The man leaned in, breath thick with alcohol, his smirk widening. "What's in there?" he sneered, tapping the tote. "Your life savings?" Claire's eyes flicked to his glass, then back to his face. Her voice was low, controlled, and laced with quiet steel. "Careful," she said. "Even spills are hard to clean." The grin on his face faltered, just slightly. His laugh came forced, awkward, his bravado cracking like thin ice. By now, the crowd had grown bolder, their voices rising, fueled by champagne and self-importance. A man in his 40s, broad-shouldered and sunburned, approached, flashing his Rolex like a badge of honor. "What are you, a professor of oceanography?" he mocked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Vanessa jumped in again, her smile sugar-sweet but toxic. "Don't spoil the party with fake expertise, sweetheart." Another woman, older, her face pulled tight from one too many procedures, leaned close, her whisper loud enough for half the deck to hear. "You're just someone's tag-along guest. Don't act important." Claire stayed silent, her eyes on the horizon, her fingers resting lightly on the frayed strap of her tote. Then, calmly, she spoke. "If the current shifts in 12 minutes, she said softly, "your anchor won't hold." The deck went still for a moment, the laughter catching in mid-air before erupting again, harsher this time, desperate to dismiss her words. "She's insane," the gold chain guy said, doubling over, slapping his knee. "What is this, a weather report?" But the captain froze. His head snapped toward the horizon, his jaw tightening. Without hesitation, he turned to his first mate, barking orders. Within seconds, they were repositioning the anchor, checking the radar, scanning the current. Nobody noticed "Hey, not yet." Claire's gaze remained steady on the waves. Her fingers traced the worn patch sewn into the side of her tote, the faint outline of a naval insignia faded by time and salt. She didn't need to say more. The ocean was speaking for her, and the tide was shifting. The sun dipped lower, painting the ocean in strokes of molten gold. The air shifted, heavier now, the kind of weight that makes people quiet without knowing why. Claire sat near the stern, her tote resting on her lap, her fingers tracing the worn edges of the fabric. Around her, the laughter still rose and fell, brittle and forced, each sound sharper than the last. Vanessa, unrelenting as ever, stalked closer, her glass refilled, her diamonds throwing fractured light onto the deck. "Seriously," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, her manicured hand gesturing toward Claire, who invited her. "She's ruining the vibe." The man with the Rolex barked a laugh, throwing an arm around Vanessa's shoulders. "Yeah, and what's with the tote bag?" he said, his grin wide and cruel. "Did you pack your lunch or something?" The group exploded into another round of mock applause and clinking glasses. Claire didn't look at them, she simply adjusted the strap of her tote, her movements slow, deliberate, unbothered. Her silence was louder than their voices, and it irritated them more than any comeback could have. Another woman, emerald green dress flowing, champagne flute in hand, stepped forward, her earrings catching the dying light. She leaned toward Claire with a syrupy smile, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut. "You know, you could at least try smiling. You're bringing the whole party down with that serious face." Claire finally turned her gaze toward her, her eyes steady but unreadable. Her lips parted slightly, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, almost tender. "Smiles," she said softly, "don't change the tide." The laughter faltered, the woman's smirk wavered, and she turned away, muttering something under her breath to save face. A strange unease rippled through the crowd, but before they could make sense of it, a sound rolled across the open water, a low, steady rumble. At first, they thought it was thunder, but there were no clouds above, only clear skies stretching endlessly across the horizon. The sound deepened, heavy enough to vibrate through the yacht's polished deck, and heads turned instinctively toward the distance. Then someone gasped. Far on the horizon, cutting through the shimmering gold of the dying sun, a massive silhouette rose against the sea. "What the hell is that?" a man in linen whispered, his voice thin. It grew larger by the second, a gray blade slicing cleanly through the waves, its presence undeniable, its authority unquestionable. A Navy destroyer. The whispers started immediately, sharp and fast like sparks catching dry leaves. "Oh my God, is that military? Why is it coming straight toward us?" "Relax, they're probably just passing by." Phones lifted into the air, clicking and flashing, Instagram captions already forming. The platinum-haired woman squealed, flipping her hair for the camera. "Okay, this is insane, eh?" Selfies with the Navy behind us. But as the destroyer drew closer, the energy shifted. Its horn sounded not a short, cheerful greeting but a long, deep blast that shook the air like distant thunder. It wasn't casual, it wasn't friendly, it was ceremonial. The laughter died instantly. On the destroyer's deck, lined in perfect symmetry, hundreds of sailors stood at attention. Their uniforms were pressed, their boots gleaming, their faces solemn, and then, as one, they raised their hands in salute. Not at the yacht, not at the guests, at Claire Monroe. The air thickened with stunned silence. Champagne glasses trembled in hands suddenly unsteady. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. The man with the Rolex blinked rapidly, shaking his head as if denial could rewrite what he was seeing. "No," he muttered, his voice cracking. "No way they're saluting her." But they were. A woman in her 50s, wrapped in silk and designer arrogance, took a step back, clutching the railing. "This has to be a mistake," she said, her voice shaking, loud enough for everyone to hear. "They're not saluting a broken bar." Her husband, a man whose cigar had burned down to nothing, nodded frantically. "Exactly, mix-up. Has to be." But the destroyer's officers didn't move, their salute unwavering, absolute. The captain of the yacht, standing near the helm, froze, his jaw tightened, his weathered hands gripping the wheel. Slowly, almost reverently, he turned toward Claire, his voice low but carrying. "Ma'am," he said softly. The single word cut through the stillness like a blade. Every head snapped toward him, confusion turning to dawning dread. "Ma'am, not miss, not lady, not guest." That was a word you reserved for authority, for command. Vanessa's diamonds caught the last shred of sunlight as she swallowed hard, her voice suddenly fragile. "He broken bar." He's talking to her. Claire didn't respond. She didn't look at them. She simply stepped forward, her sandals soft against the teak deck, and raised her hand. Her salute was precise, flawless, done so many times it was muscle memory etched into bone. The destroyer's horn sounded again, a single booming note that shook the air, reverent and heavy with meaning. Then, through a crackle of static, a voice thundered from the destroyer's loudspeaker. "We welcome Admiral Claire Monroe, commander of the Yacht operation." The words landed like a cannon blast. The air shifted in an instant, the arrogance evaporating from the yacht like mist burned away by the sun. Vanessa stumbled back a step, her glass nearly slipping from her hand. The man with the Rolex lowered his eyes. The platinum-haired influencer's phone trembled as she tried, and failed, to keep recording. Claire lowered her hand, her movements steady, deliberate. She picked up her tote from the deck, brushing a thumb over the small, faded naval insignia stitched into the side. "I'm retired now," she said quietly, her voice carrying in the stunned silence. "Consider these a broken bar, just my vacation." Nobody laughed. The destroyer slowed, its shadow stretching across the yacht like a reminder of power, silent, commanding, absolute. Then, from its side, a small boat lowered into the water, slicing swiftly toward them. A single officer stood tall inside, his dress uniform immaculate, medals glinting like stars under the fading light. He stepped aboard the yacht with boots that struck the deck like clockwork, straight-backed, crisp, and precise. He walked to Claire and stopped before her. He saluted sharply, his voice ringing out with controlled strength. "Admiral Monroe," he said, each syllable laced with respect, "it's an honor to see you again." Gasps scattered across the deck like falling glass. The same guests who had laughed minutes ago now stared in silence, their faces pale, their arrogance stripped bare. Claire returned the salute, her hand steady, her expression unchanged. "Good to see you too, Lieutenant," she said softly, her voice firm but warm. He handed her a sealed envelope, his hand steady despite the weight of the moment. She took it without hesitation, tucking it into her tote as though it were nothing more than a passing message. The officer turned, saluted once more, and left as quickly as he had arrived, his small boat cutting back toward the destroyer. The guests didn't move. Claire walked toward the bow, each step unhurried, each movement carrying quiet authority. Nobody blocked her path, nobody dared. They parted without speaking, drawn aside like the tide retreating from the shore. She stopped at the very edge of the yacht, her beige dress fluttering in the sea breeze, and looked out over the waves. The destroyer fired 3 ceremonial salutes, each booming blast echoing across the open water, reverent and unyielding. From across the deck of the destroyer, hundreds of voices rose in unison, carried by the ocean wind, strong enough to rattle the air. "Honor to the Admiral!" It was a sound that vibrated through bone, a wave crashing straight through the hearts of everyone who heard it. Some guests lowered their heads, shame sinking heavy into their stomachs. Others clutched their champagne glasses tightly, as though holding on to them could keep their world from cracking. Vanessa turned away, her flawless hair failing to shield her flushed face. Claire said nothing. She didn't need to. The destroyer lingered for a moment longer, its presence colossal, undeniable, and then began to move, cutting away into the open sea until it was just another shadow on the horizon. The yacht was silent now, the party forgotten, the laughter choked into nothing. The waves lapped gently at the hull, a sound impossibly soft against the weight of what had just happened. Claire leaned against the railing, her tote hanging lightly from her shoulder, and watched the water as if the ceremony had been nothing more than a passing breeze. The captain stood at the helm, his hat pulled low, his jaw tight. He didn't speak, but he glanced at her once, a look filled with quiet reverence before returning his gaze to the open sea. And somewhere deep inside, every single guest felt it as a shift in power, the reality of just how small their designer labels, their curated lives, their shallow pride really were. Claire Monroe hadn't raised her voice once, and yet she'd left the entire deck in silence. The ocean stretched endless before her, wild and untamed, and she stood at the edge of it, the breeze tugging at her dress, the setting sun catching in her dark hair, steady and unshaken as always. For Claire, it wasn't about proving them wrong. It never had been. Some storms pass on their own, others, you carry with you. She let the waves speak for her, and the sea, as always, obeyed.